All right. Well, if you're ready, if you want to chat fatherhood, let's just. I'm already recording, so we can just start it up. Um,
Yep, you're on.
but I was excited to talk to you because it's a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart. And you have two children, right?
That's correct. Yep, I got
What?
a teenage son. His name is Jake. He's 16, and I have a 13-year-old daughter named Quinn.
All right. So 16-year-old son. So 2004, Jake comes around or somewhere in that range. Um, why don't you just start by taking us back a little bit? Where were you in your maybe your career, your life? What was going on for Mark Bell when Jake
I
entered
was,
the world?
I was where you're at. I was in Ohio. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. I basically worked with Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell, and learned. Was just basically under his mentorship and tutelage, I guess you'd say. Um, it wasn't really a job as much as it was a I guess almost like an internship type of thing. I hung out with him every single day and tried to learn as much as I could. Also at the time I was pursuing a career in professional wrestling, and so while I was in Columbus, Ohio, I would also commute to Cincinnati, Ohio, and they had a WWE training ground there for a little bit. And they also had one in Louisville, Kentucky. So I would kind of travel to both spots here and there, two hours to Cincinnati, 4 hours to Louisville. And I was trying to pursue a career in wrestling, but yeah, that's where I was at. My wife and I, we met each other in Los Angeles, California at a bar called Sharky's in Hermosa Beach, which is kind of a pretty famous spot. Um, and just kind of trying to figure out our lives as young 20-year-old kids. I mentioned to her one day, I was like, I really feel like I'm pretty good at this powerlifting thing, but I need to go all in and just really pursue it 100%. And so I said, I would really love to see what it looked like to train with Louis Simmons and, maybe live in Ohio for a year. I don't know how long I'd need to do it for, but I think that would be, a good amount of time. And my wife said, well, my wife was the breadwinner at the time. And she said, well, let me see if I could work my California job out in Ohio. Let me see if I could do it remotely.
Sure.
Which was not a popular choice
Right.
at the time, but now you kind of,
Way pre-pandemic.
She was just in ad sales. Yeah, she was in ad sales, and so all she had to do was hustle and call some people up. And at the time, she worked for a radio network. But basically, her boss said yes, and the rest is history. Moved out to Ohio, and several months later, we had our son Jake. That's a day that changes your life forever. I think when you think about relationships, when you get with somebody, there's the first couple of weeks, everything's pretty amazing. And then you're like, well, I don't know how amazing this is going to be. Like if we get closer, what's going to happen. And you're kind of apprehensive about that. But if you found the right person, it usually be amazing. And then you move in together and you're like, well, I don't know what's going to happen with this. And again, if you're with the right person, it continues to work out really well again. And there's really not a lot of significant changes. You just, you found a companion, you found kind of a life partner and everything's, but once you have children, it really changes the dynamics because it's just, things need to be shifted. The priority needs to be shifted in the household.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you don't want your kids to really run your household.
Right.
And so you end up with a really interesting, kind of, I don't know, just way of living, and everyone has to adjust to it. There's even just small things like your birthday or some of these, it's just, everything just gets shifted off to the side. It's just not that important anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is whether your kid's healthy and whether your kids, got all the stuff that they need, especially when they're infants, when they're really, really little. That's really all you're concerned about. And the family kind of goes through a time period where sleeping is not really something that you get much of. And gets to be kind of difficult. But I would just say, to answer the question a little quicker, I guess, where I was in my life is probably where a lot of other people are in their lives right now, just starting out and just trying to figure it out, how do I, you already feel like you're buried. You already feel like you're buried underneath a bunch of rubble, and you don't know how to get started with anything. You don't know how to make money. Then you throw a kid on top of that. That's perfect. Really.
Some gasoline on the stress fire.
Yeah, but what it does do though is it does make you kind of quote unquote grow up quick.
Yep.
All the stupid, silly jokes and all the different things that you do when you're being just immature. Those things can still continue onward when you're a dad, but at the same time, every once in a while, you're like, I shouldn't be saying that. I shouldn't be doing that. I'm a dad. I need to like a higher standard for myself or something. So once in a while, you're like, man, I better like, start acting like I'm a dad, here and there. But yeah, that's how it was for me when we had Jake. It was, how do I figure out how to provide for this family, and how do I figure out how to provide for this little being that's in the house now that I don't know anything about how to do anything for.
Mm-hmm. Right. So how did that change your mindset then? You're in Ohio, Jake shows up, you're working out, training with Louie, you're driving to Cincinnati for the wrestling stuff. I'm imagining that you're already, from a time perspective, pretty committed with those items. And then not to mention your wife's the primary breadwinner. Kind of do you recall what's going through your mind, and kind of from a kind of professional perspective, what that did to your mindset?
Yeah. I think at that particular time, my main thing was, how do I offload any extra stuff that maybe my wife has to do? Like, how can I assist? How can I help? What can I do with my child? Because, when the baby's being like breastfed and stuff, as a dad, you kind of feel helpless. And this is a really weird statement. And, but other dads can relate. People that aren't dads yet are like, what? But you really aren't that attached to your child for a while. Like, it takes a long time. Like, I would say you're going to be attached to them, obviously, but I'm talking about like on that kind of higher level type shit. And I think that sometimes that doesn't happen for like 2 years or so, till the kid's like 2-3 years old sometimes. And I think that's because, the baby grows in the mom's stomach, and the baby is, nursed by the mom and so forth. And even if dad's feeding the baby here and there and stuff, it's just not the same. And so even though you have this responsibility, your like purpose is still weird as a guy, because you don't know you still don't know what you're kind of doing or what your role is necessarily, or at least that's the way it was for me personally. And so I was just trying to, find my way and trying to figure things out. And so from a career standpoint, I didn't have a career. My goal, my job at that time was to try to figure out what are things that I can do with Jake that can just mitigate stress, away from my wife, or how can I help or assist with, other things, and so when we were in Ohio, it was hard because we didn't have family members around. But as soon as we moved back out to California, where she's from originally, it became a lot easier. And then I could say, hey, I'm going to go take Jake. I'm going to go take him downtown, and I'm going to walk him around town. And why don't you go, hang out with your sister, or, see what your mom's up to? Or because like the moms really get crushed when they have a kid. The baby is so attached to them, and they just don't have any time for themselves. I remember my wife just being like, man, I just wish I could like take a crap or take a shower,
Right.
I just, because then the baby's crying, and so it's like anytime that I was there, anytime I could, I tried to my best to help with that, and like changing diapers and all that stuff. Like, I'm not above any of that. So I did a lot of that, and got made fun of and ridiculed by my dad and my uncle for that. But, they grew up with different
Right.
circumstances than I did.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's been kind of my journey too, is just like, what can I do? Where can I help? And, that does, you know, the bottle is great when that works, but also changing a lot of diapers and, doing the not so fun jobs, but take some of the stress off mom. Um, so kind of as you progress, then like you went on obviously to figure out what your career path was. And, that's been a number of different careers, a number of different businesses you've started, Super Training Gym, Sling Shot, Power Magazine, now the Power Project podcast, which is, a top 50 health and fitness podcast. So clearly you've invested your time and energy into building these things that have been massively successful. So how have you approached balancing that side of it with being a dad and a husband? I don't know what your perspective is on the term, work-life balance, but kind of what's your approach been to doing all of those different things?
I think number one I should point out is, anybody listening to this that's just starting out and just trying to figure out, which direction to even take a step in. A lot of times that's the hardest part. Like, I just don't even know, like I'm motivated, but I don't even know where should I aim my energy.
Right.
Don't be scared. That's very normal. And it took me a long time to figure things out. And, luckily my wife, we suit each other really well. She's when I met her, she was very mature, like beyond my years, even though she's like only a year and a half older than me. And so I would say, like, a lot of people listening to this, like, if you're 20, you're 25, you're 30, even if you're 35 and you're like, man, or even if you're 40, I don't even care how old you are. If you feel like you don't have shit figured out, you can still figure it out. You just have to want to work. You have to, really trying to lean into your interests. In terms of like balance, I don't really ever feel like anything's that much of a challenge in terms of balance, because it's all things that I'm really interested in for the most part. So it's not like I'm doing like tedious stuff that I don't want to do. And it's also not like I'm just like, writing out a wish list of my favorite things to do either. Like I'm not just hitting like pleasure sensors or whatever and just doing stuff that makes me happy. It's all stuff that just that I'm really interested in, and I really lean into that. What I've learned over the years is that, people will say, well, I just want to really do what makes me happy. Well, I think the word makes me is that term is an interesting one and a dangerous one, because nothing can really make you do anything. Nothing can really make you, it's your interpretation of it. Right. Mm-hmm. So, if someone's like, oh, well, that, made me upset, or that, well, again, it's your interpretation that made you upset. But if you're going to expect something to make you happy, well, what happens when it doesn't make you happy? Or what happens when it doesn't work out the way that you were anticipating, or the way that you thought, right? And so for me, it's more like, let me just continue to find things that I'm interested in. Let me figure out ways of kind of, leaning into those things. When it comes to this like kind of idea of work-life balance, I think that you'll have so many different answers from so many different people. But what I would agree with is kind of the Gary Vee thing, where Gary Vee says, like, basically, you don't really have to always be there for your kids. Mm-hmm. That's an important thing for mothers and fathers to understand. Now, it's not great to leave your kids behind all the time and neglect them. But think about your own upbringing, and think about situations where your parents didn't do something for you that you could otherwise just do yourself. And think about times where they did leave you alone. They left you alone with your cousins. They left you alone maybe with your friends. They left you alone. Maybe you were throwing rocks in a stream from a bridge or something, or you were doing something you maybe aren't supposed to do. But then you police officer said something to you, or another adult said something to you, and you kind of were like, oh, I got, but you learn, right? You right. Learn really well. And a lot of times your children are going to learn great when you're not around, especially if you're teaching them the things that they need to know anyway. So I think that would be another weird category of things, is like to understand that you definitely shouldn't feel like you have to always be there for your children. And in order to end up looking like you have balance, or in order to end up looking like you have so many different things going on at one time, the trick is to not really ever have that much going on at one time.
Mm-hmm.
Each thing that you mentioned are all things I started at different times, and they're all things that I put a lot of time and effort into at different times. The last thing I would touch upon here is that, for example, like I'm starting a supplement company, right? So then people are like, well, how do you add a supplement company into everything else that you're doing? Well, it's just the starting of it that's hard. Once it's started, then you're good to go. Once you got your X amount of supplements that you're going to start with, you start to run with that, and that will consume some time. But really, in the long run, it's not me like making the supplements. I'm not like making them in my bathtub or anything like that. So, they should be able to go off in their own direction, in their own way, because you want to, at some point, you want to allocate stuff out to, allocate some stuff out to some other people. But yeah, I think, you'll hear sometimes people say, well, there is no balance, you got to go all in on stuff. But I think the truth is that there'll be different times in your life where you spend different amounts of time with different people, or working on different particular businesses. And I would even include your family in that. Like, it's possible from the time your kids are 3 until they're 11 that you're just not around that much, because you're trying to figure your life out and you're trying to provide for your family. If you have other options to not do it that way, that would be great. But a lot of times people don't. That's just a lot of times what people are faced with. And then, so can you hang out with your kids a lot more when they're a little older? And could they be understanding as they grow up? And they're like, yeah, dad wasn't around for like a lot of this stuff when I was really young, but now he's here all the time. It's pretty cool, And
Mm-hmm.
how many times you've seen, I'm not saying like that I'm in favor of like picking your job over your children, but what I am saying is that you've seen it time and time again where children have been neglected really badly for many, many years for various reasons. Maybe dad, left the house, or, maybe there's other issues, but he's gone for 15 years. And he comes back and he says, hey, I want to be part of your life. I mean, a lot of times you see the kids saying, hey, yeah, I would love that, and I'm sure it's a bumpy road to get going again. But I think that, just consider that all things are possible, and that you don't have to try to feel like you're spinning 1,000 plates at one time, because that is just, I don't think it's really feasible to do that for all that long without getting too tired of it.
Yeah, those plates starting to fall and crack. What I kind of take away from a lot of what you said there too is that it comes down to prioritizing those really important things to make sure that you're really only focusing on those top 1 or 2 things on the work front, not totally overwhelmed there, but kicking ass at those things, just kind of one at a time. That's probably a good rule just for success in general, is not to have too many professional plates spinning. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
Also add, the easiest way to like be successful is to lean into this idea of like, what are you interested in? Like it's easy to look good at something when you just are very, very interested in it, because from an energy perspective, you won't run out of energy. You won't get tired. You won't be wondering if you're doing the right thing. One mistake I do see a lot of dads make in particular is this idea of, I'm doing this for the family. Like, I'm going to work these extra hours for the family. And then they get caught up in that, and they get stuck in that. And that's a mistake. So I would just be a little cautious of that, because you can kind of become a workaholic, and you can become obsessed with numbers. You can be obsessed with money. That happened to my dad when I was a kid. I remember I was probably somewhere between the ages of 12 to 14, 15, somewhere in there. And my mom had to tell my dad, like, hey, like, you need to like slow down. And my dad was like, well, I thought you wanted me to, my dad worked for IBM. And my dad was like, I thought you wanted me to climb this corporate ladder. And she was like, yeah, but not at the expense of our children. And my dad was like, what? Like, what are you talking? Like, he didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Because he was in like a trance. He was just saying anything that happened at work, it was yes, yes, yes. Hey, can you do this? Yep. Hey, can you do that? Yep. Hey, can you do this? And he would reap the benefits of that. He'd get paid more. So he got more and more into it. But, you know, at some point he almost kind of got swallowed up and lost in that. And then I actually noticed a huge shift in him from that point when my mom was like, hey, no upper management positions, no this, no that. She's like, you know, just stay where you're at. We're doing good. Like we got more than enough, you know?
Yeah.
And when my dad did that, I remember after that, I remember like my dad kind of hanging out with me more, like me, just he and I, you know? And I remember that was just really valuable. That was like, I mean, there's certain times in your life as a kid where you really like, you always need your parents, but it matters more, I think, as you get a little bit older. So if you're not there to see your kid, you know, fall down the stairs and, you know, and bump their head or whatever when they're 3, you know, hopefully you'll be there, you know, when they're 12 and they're having more complicated problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So seeing your dad go through that process, and I think I heard you at some point even say that he had a heart attack that may have been stress induced from how hard he was working when he was pretty young. But seeing all of that, did that have any impact kind of on how you approached kind of your work or relationship with your kids now that you're kind of on the flip side of that coin?
Yeah, I think that had a huge impact on me. And I guess I really never thought about it before, but like my dad, you know, I mean, he still has like some medical complications and stuff, but he had like heart disease. He had some sort of heart issue when he was like 44 or 43. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, man, you know, well, it's understandable being in your 40s. He's so old.
Right.
You know? Now here I am, 43, and I'm like, okay, well, you know, it's not very old, but I think that's why I chose to do things in a different way. My dad has always been, he's always been very religious. He's always been very kind. He's always been a very understanding person. And, but one thing that I noticed from him was that every once in a while he would like blow up, you know, he'd get really frustrated, get really mad. And at a certain point, it kind of happened like about once a month, you know, where he'd just be at wit's end. You know, he'd come home from a long day and his asshole kids, you know, would break something or whatever. And you know, he'd hear it from my mom, you know, he'd hear it from his wife and just be frustrated. And, you know, you still see this happen quite a bit today. But when I kind of saw some of that going on, and my dad was he was not verbally abusive. He was not abusive physically in any way. He would just be pissed. You know, I'd hear him like cuss and stuff like that. And, you know, as a kid, you think that's the end of the world. I mean, that, you know, it scares you, you know, when you're a kid. Right. And I'm not even going to say my dad was scary. I'm not trying to paint that picture. I'm just trying to say that he would show a lot of emotion. He would kind of be triggered by these certain things. And so for me, I was always like, well, you know, I don't, that's why I was always been really calm. You know, I think I wanted to try to take a different approach and just recognize like the things that happen around us. Those are all things that are part of our environment, and they're all external. But whatever the input is that's coming in through our senses doesn't have to be the output that comes back out. So just because something sounds stupid or sounds like, hey, someone's spilled milk all over our new carpet, you know, or it's like, well, all right, well, if I punch a hole in the wall, now there's a hole in the wall and there's milk on the carpet. You know, it's like someone's got to fix the wall, right? And so I try to just look at stuff that way. Obviously I still get caught up in stuff. I'll still get frustrated here and there. But I try to have a different perspective, try to be a little bit calmer with it. And, I guess try to solve the problem, like what's the problem? What happened? And so when it comes to being a dad, when I see stuff with my kids, especially when they were younger, let's say Jake is messing with his sister. That's his job, right? He's the older brother. And so let's say that he's messing around with his sister. Well, if he's messing around with his sister and making her cry, then what I used to do is I would take Jake, I would separate him, and I would say, sometimes I would wait even. It would just kind of depend on how volatile the situation got. So sometimes I might say, hey, go to your room, and I'd separate them out. And I'd talk to them maybe an hour later, because while they're wound up, you really can't get anywhere. But what I would do is I'd sit down with them and I'd say, okay, you got my attention. What do you need? How can I help? Like, what is there? You want to go do something together? Are you sad? You mad? Like, what's, what, like, why, why are you? And if he's like, well, I don't know, I'm bugging my sister for no reason. Well, then I could say, well, you know what, we don't appreciate that. Like, she's not doing anything. And I'll explain to him too, like, you're a boy, you're older. Like, there's nothing cool or nothing, there's nothing great about you breaking one of her toys. There's nothing great about you ripping something from her hands. You're older than her. You're stronger than her, and let's just not do this way. And I try to even explain to both children a lot of times. I would say, this household isn't for that. Like, we don't yell at each other. We can have discussions. We can talk. And we can talk about anything that anybody wants to talk about. But, this is not the home for yelling and screaming. And, I would say, hey, look, we have a beautiful pool outside. We have a hot tub outside. We have, we got all these great, nice things. Like, let's make the house predominantly for fun. Let's have a good time. Like, I don't want to, so I don't allow them to scream to each other from one room to another type of thing. Like, just get up and go and say, hey, I need you to do this, or I need you to do that, whatever it is that you might need from somebody. But just those little things, has kept the quote unquote like noise down. And what I've noticed is when the noise is down, you can concentrate better. So this might be like if you were trying to back up your car or truck up a driveway or something like that, right? Well, you might have whatever your favorite music is bumping like crazy, right? And when you're on the road, as you're cruising down the street, when it's really easy and you're just driving straight. But once you go to back up into a driveway or you're in a parking structure or something like that, boom, you turn that music way down because it's too noisy and you can't concentrate, right? And I don't want to run anybody over or smash into anybody else's vehicle or bust up my own car. So you turn the music down. Like, could you do it with the music up loud? Yeah, you probably could, but it's kind of tough that way, right? So
yeah,
that's what we try to do in our family, try to, bring that chaos down, bring that chaos level down a little bit. And one easy way, I think, is just to bring that noise down a little bit.
I love that analogy. There's another analogy I heard you mention on another podcast for letting your kids experience failure is kind of like watching somebody playing Super Mario and they keep dying in the same spot at the same level, and you're just watching and you can't jump in and do it for them. So you just have to let them figure it out. Would you mind just sharing your perspective on letting your kids fail and experience failure?
Yeah, they really have to, I think. And I would also say, like, I'm not I'm not above recognizing my weaknesses. Like, watching my kids fail or even allowing them to do anything for themselves is a huge weakness of mine, and probably something that my wife and I should work on more. I mean, we do understand the value of allowing them to kind of strike out, how important that is. But at the same time, it's like they're hungry. We're like, oh, we'll make you a sandwich. They both know how to make a sandwich. You know what I mean? Like, stuff like that. I mean, we should probably, and so I want to share that with people because I don't want anyone to be like, man, how does he do it? Because we're not always doing it. You know, we do the best we can. And some of the things I've seen, you know, these analogies and stuff help a lot. And these are things I probably need to lean into a little bit more. But yeah, this idea of, you know, doing stuff for your children and not allowing them to fail, I think it's really a much bigger problem than you could really imagine. It's not benign. It doesn't go without being registered. Like, it's a thing. And, you know, I don't know, you know, things from a female perspective, but I do know from a male perspective, like, you do need to know how to stand up for yourself. You do need to know how to communicate with people. I think, you know, kind of a weak point for some men is not being able to communicate maybe the way that you want. I think this day and age, some of our masculinity has been kind of ripped away from us. And so speaking your mind, you know, sometimes is not a favorable thing. But I do think that when you take something from somebody that they could otherwise have done for themselves, I think it's a form of stealing. I think it's like you robbed them. You robbed them of an opportunity. You know, if they could have painted the wall instead of you painting the wall, well, they missed an opportunity to learn how to paint.
Right.
And I don't know what painting would turn into, but what if it was just a something that grew in them, that they felt good with any do-it-yourself type of task that they may face in their life, and they just took satisfaction in mowing their lawn. They took satisfaction in having a garden. They took satisfaction in these different things. And so I think you have to be, once you know that they know how to do it, then I think that kind of opens the door to saying, and occasionally still being a parent and still smothering them with love, I think is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, hey, you know, when they're looking in the fridge and they're going to choose a crappy snack or something like that, you could say, hey, if you want, I can make you a sandwich, or, you know, if you want, you can make one yourself, but there's turkey and cheese and everything in there, and you can kind of let them kind of pick on their own. But the Mario Brothers analogy, I love using that game for a lot of analogies, because like the gamification of life is really important. Like, why do you have satisfaction out of mowing the lawn? I don't know. Like, why does, like, I personally don't have that. That's never hit me. And the reason why it's never hit me is because my dad would go to show me something, and then he would say, no, you're not doing it right. And then he would show me. And by the time he got done showing me, everything was usually done, you know? And then also he just saw I wasn't that interested in a lot of stuff. And so other than like football or, you know, lifting or whatever it was that I got into later on. But
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can be happy with some small tasks, like just doing your own laundry, like, who the hell knows why some people for some people, it hits reward senses in their brain, and they feel great that they did it. It's a sense of accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, trying to figure out life's purpose and trying to figure out why we're here, all these things are really, really complicated. But if you can get satisfaction and gratification out of small things, turn things into a game, have a lot of fun every day, it's like, man, you're going to be, you know, light years ahead of a lot of other people. And if you think about, you know, how we learn, you know, I just mentioned this morning. Here's another kind of analogy for you. Have you ever stayed at a hotel for like 4 or 5 days, and it's the last day that you know which way to turn out of your room to get to the elevator? It's the last day that you know which way to turn to get to the lobby and to get out of the hotel. Like, it takes you a couple of days to like figure it out, and it's all error correction. You have to learn it all on your own. You turn left and you go the wrong way, and you're like, fuck, I went the wrong way. And this is life. Life is like that. Life is a giant maze. that if you don't allow for error correction, you'll never really have the knowledge. That's where all knowledge is based off of. That's where it all comes from. And you can be told stuff and you can be taught stuff. And that helps, but there's really not much like having that first person vantage point of, going to hit a nail with a hammer and smashing your finger. That kind of thing is like, yeah, I can tell you that it's going to hurt if you hit your thumb with a hammer, but you kind of need to miss the nail and hit your thumb on your own to now know how to hold the nail properly to do that. And that's a major factor in trying to build anything is you use hammer and nails.
Yep.
It's kind of the beginning stages of it all, right? And so these are all things that, like I said, they can be shown to you and they can be taught to you, but how many people in our society do we really look up to, do we really admire, that just have it told to them or that just have read a book? Normally it's like, nah, like I'm not vibing with that good. Okay, that guy's smart. That's cool. That dude's got a big vocabulary, but I'm going to side up with the dudes that are actually doing it.
Right.
I don't want to know anything about training from somebody that just read a book about it, really.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see that they've, built themselves up a little bit or built some other people up around them through actually going to the gym or through actually, practicing and having some failures with athletes or failures of their own. Most of the time in life, the people that have failed the most are the people that we put up on the biggest pedestal. They just have failed so bad. And you're just like, wow, how in the hell did they figure life out to come out the other end and end up successful? Like a David Goggins.
Yep.
People become legendary, right? And so not doing stuff yourself or not allowing your kids to do stuff for themselves can be, I would view it as like you're really kind of stealing a moment from them, stealing an opportunity from them.
Yeah. You're exactly correct. You can't just telling them something. The lesson's not going to hit home. I don't know that I actually learned how to do anything out of this, but I remember my parents telling me, don't touch the cigarette lighter in the car. And I literally snuck into my parents' car, stuck the little thing in there, it popped out, and I'm like, how bad can it be? I must have been 5 years old or something and touched it, ran in screaming and crying. I don't know that made me any better at anything in life other than not to be a total dumbass. But then I knew, then I wasn't going to do it again.
You probably didn't do it again. And then maybe with your own children, maybe you'll approach it differently. Maybe rather than saying, hey, don't mess with that, you need to say, hey, you know what? Like if you mess with that thing, it gets really, really hot. And I actually pushed the button one time and touched it and it burnt my skin and it made me cry like crazy, and then they'll be like, whoa, like what the hell? They still might be curious. They still might want to find out, but you gave them all the information that they needed to,
you didn't make it some sort of taboo thing that they're like, I just got to get in there and see for myself. You mentioned earlier that when you were younger, there were a lot of things that you weren't into. And I know from some of the stories you've shared that school was one of those things. You just didn't jive with school. It didn't serve you. It just wasn't the right fit. So I'm curious with your own kids then, how you've approached school, just education in general, knowing that wasn't the right setting for you really to learn and to grow.
So I'd say that, education, I'm a big fan of learning and acquiring more knowledge. Again, I think the easiest way to be a success is to have something that you're highly interested in. And when you have something that you're really, really interested in, it's very easy to become a material expert in that given field. You're really into oil painting, or you're really into Western art, or you're really into the piano, or you're really into rap, or whatever it is. Like you're just like really, really, really into it. You'll probably figure out a way to learn enough about it to where you have the knowledge, the education to back you up, to make you of value to society, to even put, to not always necessarily monetize, but for society to put value on something that you created, is actually really important. Even if you played music and someone didn't pay you for it, but people got really happy because of the kind of music that you played, or it touched them in some way. They got excited, by it. These things are really important, and you can't do those things without having knowledge, without, like, you need to, like, know. Some people have an innate predisposition to being better at certain things than other people, but you still have to, like, learn your craft. And so while I hated school, I do share with my children that, the knowing of something is important. You got to know something, and it could literally be anything, but that's something that, if it makes you happy, it's going to be that much easier. Or if you find happiness from it and you're interested in it, it's gonna just make everything else easier. It's gonna make knowing it easier. So my kids, school is weird because it's like the only thing in this country that I can think of that you're forced to do. Like, it's illegal not to go to school, which I understand why, but it's also kind of weird. There's literally nothing else I can think of that you're really forced to do, except with acceptance of when you are trying to do something else. So, for example, like if you have a car, then you need car insurance, or if you're trying to, you need a license, right? Like, because then you're gaining this freedom to do this thing, right? But with school is really weird, because I think what used to be told to us, but is a lie that just doesn't hold up anymore, is if you don't go to school, you're going to be a loser. If you don't do well in school, you're going to be a loser. Or it might have been said differently to you. It might have been said, if you don't do well in high school, you're not going to be able to go to college. But what they don't tell you is, what's the point of going to college? The whole point of going to college is to try to become an expert of some sort in a vertical, whatever it is that you study.
Right.
You study American history, you study whatever it is. You study American history and you're going to be a professor, but not everybody really needs that, because there's other ways to get experiences. There's other ways to grow. I've been a strength coach for a long time. I've been a fitness coach, I guess, for, many, many years now. And there's a lot of different ways to get to this. Actually, interestingly enough, some of my favorite people that I've ever met have been people that have studied stuff the exact opposite way that I did. I learned a lot of stuff intuitively by doing and by trying different things, tinkering, dicking around, as I like to call it, really messing around with a lot of different stuff, and not even, trying to eliminate the word try, because not even trying stuff, just doing stuff, doing different things. And a lot of people I know have kind of come from the other side, where they went to college for it. They learned, like, biomechanics. They read a bunch of books, and then they got in the weight room as well. And so they have a good mix of both. But for me, I ended up with a good mix of both too, because at some point my knowledge became, good enough to where I could talk to these other high level professionals and I could still understand what they were saying. And then maybe even to more of an advantage for me, I can interpret what they're saying for other people and say, oh, what he's talking about when he's talking about stimulating the central nervous system through potentiation is that, if you unrack something that's really fucking heavy in a bench press, and then you hold it for 5 seconds, and then you rack the weight and you take some weight off there, it still registers in your body and in your brain and in your nervous system. Your nervous system has been encoded with that 405 pounds that you just lifted off the bar. So now when you go to bench 315, you'll be able to apply more force into it. Things like that, like where otherwise, if I didn't have my knowledge that I had through trial and error and through going to many different gyms, but then also following all that up. Like, that's not enough. Following all that up by going to seminars. I used to have a VHS tape of Westside Barbell that my wife was just like, make it stop, like it was just on all the time. And she was like, oh my God. And she knew all the different methods, She's like, here's the maximum effort method, and here's the dynamic effort method. She's like rattling it off as she was like doing something else. But you do need to become a material expert in something. And so what I share with my kids when it comes to actual, school or schooling is that I'm not that concerned with school. However, at the moment, it's like the only measure that we have of your interest to represent yourself the best way. However, if you don't care, then that's kind of up to you. If you don't like, I would love it that you care. And I'm going to lay out the reasons why I believe that you should care about some of these things. But if you don't care, I'm not going to try to make you care about it. I'm not going to try to make you really do anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you information that I think would be helpful to you to making the best choices. With my son this year, my son struggled in school before just because he doesn't want to do it. Not because he had any issues like I had, but so I talked to him and I said, look, man, there's so many different options. I mean, we can go to a private school. There's a school out here in California. They kind of fly under the radar. They're somewhere between like they're somewhere between like a school and like a club. And they're able to still have in school, in-person learning and things like that. And it's a very unconventional form of school. It's like, it's almost a little weird to where it's like mentoring and stuff. There's no religious component to it or anything like that, but it's just really fascinating. It's like privately funded. And so I talked to my son and I was like, hey, you know what? You have so many different options in terms of school. We can do whatever you want, and he chose just to stay where he's at. And I said, okay, well, look, if this is what you're going to choose to do, we need you to participate. Like, we need you to just put in. I'm not even asking you to like do 100%. I would just like for you to absorb the information, do well enough to where it's not a problem with your mom, basically, is kind of a big part of it. But my son is too smart in terms of this. Like, he knows that it doesn't matter. He knows that nobody's looking at Jeff Bezos's 11th grade, report and then saying, you know what, Jeff, like you got to turn in a lot of that money and you're gonna have to dissolve some of these businesses because that D that you got in 11th grade is just, it's really weighing on a lot of us and we can't handle it anymore, And so I think kids are smart nowadays, and with the resources of the internet, they know more than we did. And they know that school is kind of a scam and that you don't necessarily need it. And I actually believe that. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that. And that might be just through some of my own experiences. But I think my personal views on school, I think it's criminal. I don't think you should have to go. I think it's ridiculous. I think they go for way too many hours. They have way too many subjects. They go for way too long. Like, the actual school year is too long. And the amount of years they're in school is just completely ridiculous. I'm going to take you from the best years of your life, from 5 to 16, and you have to spend all these hours at school. To me, it makes absolutely no sense. And what we're seeing now with the social, with the distance learning, is we're seeing that, my idea and my concept of people going to school for way too long is 100% accurate, because kids are now going to school for maybe about 2 or 3 hours with a good, they have a few breaks in between, and they're doing well. They're doing well. I mean, I don't know how much, how much can be accomplished through, distance learning. But man, it really does cut out a lot of shit. Like cuts out trying to figure out how to get them to school. You can even, how much pollution does it cut down on, right? I mean, people are always talking about global warming, but it's like, do people even really care about it? Because they only care, I think in this country, unfortunately, I think people really only care about stuff until it becomes an inconvenience.
Yeah.
If you're like, oh, well, you can only drive your car, 4 days out of the 7 days a week, people be like, fuck that. I'd rather pollute the planet.
Yeah. Right.
I'm out.
And I feel like also with the distance learning, like what you really lose out on is the social interaction. And that's probably the piece that's maybe the most impactful from a developmental perspective. And like I said, I have an 8-month-old daughter, so this is all still a ways ahead of me, but it's kind of proof that if you can integrate that some way, cut down on this, like really get efficient at the school part, then that's probably how you can optimize the system.
Hanging out with other kids your age obviously is huge. And then what about when you were 7 and you hung out with someone who was like 9, like just had the craziest impact on you? Like, that's the coolest person I've ever met. They know how to throw a curveball or whatever. They know how to hit a baseball like a couple hundred feet further than you. And now all that stuff is huge, and that obviously is a huge aspect and element of education, of getting, just people getting together. But again, could that be accomplished with not going to a decade of school for however many days, 180 days it's wild. You'll see when you first drop your kid off at school and they're 5 or 6 years old and they're there for like 5 or 6 hours, you're like, what the fuck are they doing in that place? Like, I mean, it's just way too long. I understand it. It's like built-in babysitting. But most of the time when you start to bring this up to people that are in favor of school, they're like, well, a lot of kids get a free meal, because, and it's like, that has nothing to fucking do with school.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a separate issue that if we put our heads together, I bet we can figure it out, So yeah, school, I'm not a huge fan. I just think I guess I'd say this. There's just more optimal ways to go about doing it. And I think that distance learning, while it may take some getting used to, I think might be a pretty good step in the right direction. We really need to get our people to be thinking critically, and I just don't think that's not even really taught in school. Critical thinking skills, occasionally they'll brush up upon it, but it's like, I don't know, it's a really valuable thing to explore.
Yeah. So I've taken up a lot of your morning. So just one last question I want to ask you before I let you go here is, if you could go back to 2004 when your son was born, hop in the time machine, talk to young Mark Bell, you might hear this question a lot in regards to what you'd tell yourself about life in general, but is there some piece of wisdom or advice or just something you might say to that new dad, Mark Bell, just to push you in the right direction?
There's a quote from Mr. Rogers that I really love a lot, and it pertains to children, and it says, you don't have to do anything spectacular in this world to be loved. And I think that pertains to everybody. So if I was to tell myself anything, it would be that, because as a dad, you don't need, like, you're going to end up being spectacular just by doing the little things every day. And you're going to end up being a dad just by being you, just by going through the experience of it. And you'll have the same dumb dad jokes that your dad had, and you'll end up wearing the same stupid, out of fashion outfits that your dad wore. Like, all these things they're all going to happen. And you'll have, a lot of times dads have great like quotes and different things like that, and you'll just get there. You'll end up there. And don't think that you need to do anything spectacular. Another quote that I like is from a famous bodybuilder named Jay Cutler, who's a 4-time Mr. Olympia. Jay Cutler says, don't be fancy, be consistent.
Mm.
That's another thing with being a dad. It's like, hey man, you just got to be a dad, you know, a little bit every day. Just, you know, throw a little dadness in here and there, sprinkle it out throughout each day, get a little time in for yourself. You know, it is important. That is another important aspect of being a mom or dad, being a parent, is to, you need time to yourself. You need time to work on self-improvement, because the more that you can do that, the more that you can share with your children. My kids at this point, my son, he loves to like film stuff, and he loves to, he like writes scripts and stuff, right? And so he was telling me one day, he's like, we kind of live in the middle of nowhere. He's like, you know, I can't do this, I can't do that. And then I said, I was about to talk, I was about to say something, and he goes, he's like, stop. He's like, I know. He goes, I know, it's my perspective, and I need to have a more positive outlook, and I have resources around. I was like, good, okay, good, you got it, you know? So that's kind of part of being a dad. You know, you're going to have to repeat yourself a lot to a point of like nauseum. You're going to have to be patient. The last thing I want to kind of finish up with is, again, just being a parent and trying to juggle this whole thing is, I think it's really important, no matter how big the family is, and this could be really difficult, but if you have a lot of children, but you need to figure out time alone with your significant other. You need to figure out time alone with your child, and your significant other needs time alone with your child.
Mm-hmm.
You need to, like, just every once in a while, you need to say, hey, you guys get a chance to hang out the last couple of weeks, like by yourselves, or has it always just been all of us, you know, glommed together with the cousins over and the friends and so forth? I think these things are really important. So in my family, with our dynamics, I hang out with my wife. We go on dates all the time. We'll get away here and there. Her and I go for walks all the time. Then yesterday I walked with my son. We went on about a good 20-minute walk with our dog. And then I start going through the checklist of things, and I'm like, oh shit, I haven't had one-on-one time with Quinn in a little bit. So I need to kind of make sure that happens again. And we're not really trying to like force anything or make anything, because, you know, as your kids get to be teenagers, they don't always want to hang out with you, but we're trying to make sure that we're scraping up against it here and there and getting some of this done. And so any, you know, new parents listening to this, I think, and then is that hard to do? Like, that's not that hard to do. It might be something to kind of juggle all the time. And I'm not talking about that this needs to be done daily. This is something that you just want to kind of take a gander at, you know, every other week or so, and just make sure that it's happening. You know, just make sure that you're able to do that, because your kids, you know, they're really clamoring for your attention, you know. So and be careful of what you're doing in front of your children, because they soak everything up. And so if you tell them, hey, you got to get off that TikTok, but they see you on the phone all the time, why is it okay for you to be on the phone? Then your justification is, hey, well, it's work for me. Well, then their justification is, well, I'm talking to my friends. Like, that's pretty important. And I would agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
I would side up with them and say, yeah, that's actually really important, especially because you don't get to see your friends as much. So that's all I got in terms of being a dad.
It's awesome stuff. And it's like you said, it's none of it's that hard. It just takes some intentionality. So I appreciate you sharing it. Mark, if anybody wants to check out anything about you, where would you point them to?
I would love for people to go check out markbell.com. It is a pay website, but it shows all the different things that I utilize for nutrition. It shows all the different workouts that I do. There's old workouts on there from when I was a big fat power lifter. There's newer workouts on there. There's tons of great content, and you get a week for free if you just sign up. So you may as well just check it out and give it a shot and see if you enjoy it. If you want to be cheap like me, then you can go ahead and check out all my free content over at on my YouTube channel, which is Mark Smelly Bell. We also have a YouTube channel for super training, which which is, I believe it's just Mark Bell's Super Training or Super Training Gym or something like that. But yeah, you can check out my YouTube channel. I share out all kinds of stuff, kind of like we talked about just now, more life type stuff. And I do talk a lot about diet, and a little bit of working out is on there, but not quite as much. And if you need any Sling Shot stuff, you want to cover yourself up in the gym with products that can make your workouts a little bit more comfortable. We sell knee sleeves, elbow sleeves. Sling Shot's product I developed over a decade ago, supportive upper body device for bench press, push-ups, dips, hip circles. I'm the guy that put that product on the map and helped make all the girls' butts big on Instagram. You guys can thank me for that. But go over to mark.com and check that stuff out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Big fan. Love the podcast. I encourage people to check that out too. We'll have it all linked up in the show notes. But hey, Mark, I appreciate you being generous with your time, standing out in the rain with us, taking one for the team.
Pretty good. I don't know what's going on over here, but now the sun's back out, so I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, well, look out for those double rainbows, man.
Right.
But hey, I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Anytime you're out in California, please come check out Super Training Gym.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Will do, man.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Take care, Mark.